All right, so where am I going with all this? That was a much longer recap than I anticipated, but I really want people to grasp the concept at a theoretical level before we dive into, the real thing, because it is going to hit you, and I want you to have the tools available to you to not reject it, right? Because remember, the ego does this before you even have the chance to consider the information, right? So you want to at least be able to consider it and assess it yourself to decide consciously if that information is useful to you or not. You don't want to reject it before you even have that ability to assess the information. And one of the most critical steps in overcoming this natural reaction is to understand that it's happening, that this is a natural reaction that your ego will have before you can even notice it, unless you know it's coming. Okay, so that's the whole point of these videos, these last couple of videos with the theoretical piece, is to get you to know that this reaction is very real, and to hopefully get you in the mindset of being able to recognize when it's happening. And that's what we're going to do a bit more in this video. Okay, so first off, I am not a therapist. so what I'm going to be talking about today is some pretty deep mental exercises. At least I think they're deep mental exercises, but this is all just what I have found to be effective in my own enlightenment journey. Okay, so I'm not a trained therapist. If you've got like some, unresolved trauma or something, just know I'm just some guy on the internet sharing what has been effective for me, right? I want to share this gift with others, but that's my disclaimer before we get going. So the first step is, what we've been talking about so far is just understanding that this reaction is real, it exists, and it's probably going to be your natural reaction. Understanding that this is a real thing is probably the most important step, because if you don't take this step, you don't even have the opportunity for the other steps, because you're just going to keep going on the current path you're on rather than recognizing that there even is another path. So that's the most important thing. Hopefully you now understand that this reaction is real. You're probably going to have this reaction, not just with me, but in many interactions throughout your life. So hopefully you've taken that step now. The second step is to understand what it is. Like what it is really. And what I mean by that is its seriousness. It's not just a theoretical concept to talk about and learn about. Yeah, it is fun to talk and learn about it for sure, but it's a very real thing that will have very real impacts on your life. And it deserves respect and attention. When we're talking about the reaction when confronted with uncomfortable truths, this is something that has taken down many great men and women throughout history, and has prevented even more men and women throughout history from achieving what they could have otherwise been. Okay, this is a very real opponent. So understanding that this is a worthy opponent that can probably take you down if you're not ready for it is a critical step, right? Because if you go in underestimating your opponent, you're going to get knocked out. So you want to take this seriously, because it's not an easy battle. And I find that there's, two ways that people lose this battle. And on a spectrum, you've got the two extremes. One of the extremes I'll just call like the submitters. And these are people who just submit to the opponent. The feeling that they are confronted with when this new information is presented to them just consumes them. It's not quite the same thing, but these are similar. These people are similar to people who engage in self-destructive behavior when dealing with uncomfortable emotions. It's the people whose reaction when confronted with these negative emotions, and I don't want to belittle this whatsoever because, again, it's a very real confrontation. But just to convey my thought process here, the submitters are the ones who basically submit to that opponent, right? And their reaction, their path after being confronted with that opponent is clearly one that is not conducive to their well-being. And then at the other extreme, we've got what I call the fleers. And these are the ones who don't submit to the opponent, but they don't fight the opponent either. They run. And again, it's not exactly the same thing, but these are the people who you would commonly understand as repressing their emotions. And I don't like that terminology, like repressing, when we're talking about this, because to me, pressing is strength, right? Like the bench press or the leg press, right? It's this pressing something implies some kind of strength and control. But there's nothing impressive, right? There's nothing strong about fleeing the opponent, right? You're not pressing anything. You're running. Now, I will say that if you have to pick one, again, I'm not a therapist. Again, this is literally just I'm inferring all this from my own life experience, just to be clear. Okay, so this is all like self-reflection that I'm just openly sharing. But in my experience, if you have to pick one or the other, if I have to pick one or the other, whether it's submitting or fleeing, I'm fleeing, right? And it's to fight another day, because the submitting can be so self-destructive. It can get you in a very intense downward spiral that can be very difficult to come out of. Whereas like the fleeing, it's kind of like fight another day, but you got to fight another day. Like you have to come back and do the work. If you don't, so that fight is going to happen either way. And if it's not on your terms, it's going to be on the opponent's terms. And if you haven't put in that work, if you haven't gotten ready for that fight, when that fight comes, and it will, you're just going to be so unprepared. You're going to end up, it's going to crush you, right? And that to me, that's what happens. That's kind of my understanding of what happens to people when they repress their emotions for like decades and decades, and then eventually something happens and it just like breaks them, right? They're running from these little battles their whole life, and because they've never actually fought them, when they get to one that they can't run from, they're so unprepared that it just crushes them, right? So if you're gonna flee, and sometimes you have to, right? It's to live to fight another day. Make sure you come back to that fight on your own terms before it comes back to you. All right, so you've got these extremes here. You've got the submitters and you've got the fleers. Neither of them are going to make it out of the cave. Okay, if you need to confront your opponent head on, and you need to be ready for it. That's the only way you're going to unchain yourself. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is just how I get ready for this opponent, so that when I'm faced with it, I don't submit to it, and I also don't have to run from it. I can face it head on and unchain myself so I can turn around and look at the light.